On the morning of Mother's Day, May 10, 2020, Suzanne Morphew left her home in the rolling hills near Salida, Colorado, to go on a bike ride, a routine she had followed countless times before. She kissed her husband Barry goodbye, told him she would be back before lunch, and set out on her familiar route along quiet country roads and rugged trails. The air was crisp, the sunlight just beginning to spill across the landscape, and the town was waking up to the gentle hum of spring life. That would be the last time anyone saw her alive. By mid-afternoon, concern began to ripple through the small community. Suzanne had not returned, and friends who were used to seeing her morning messages were met with silence. Barry reported her missing, telling authorities that she had gone for a ride and never come back. He spoke calmly, describing her as an experienced cyclist who often took long trips along trails, never imagining that this day would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would last years. Search efforts were immediate. Volunteers combed the hillsides, neighbors scoured wooded ravines, and drones flew over the terrain, capturing images of every bend and trail. Suzanne's bike and helmet were discovered separately near the rim of a ravine, but nothing about their placement suggested a simple accident. The bike showed no signs of a crash, and the helmet appeared undamaged, hinting at the possibility that someone had deliberately placed them there. The more investigators examined the scene, the more discrepancies emerged in Barry's account. Barry claimed he had left the house early that morning for work, insisting that Suzanne was still asleep. But cell phone records, truck telematics, and surveillance footage later suggested gaps and inconsistencies in the story. His movements that day included unexplained stops and deletions of messages, and subtle signs emerged that contradicted the version of events he shared with law enforcement. Friends and family noted that while Barry projected a calm exterior, his private behavior sometimes hinted at tension beneath the surface. In the weeks that followed, the community's anxiety deepened. Flyers went up along every road and trail. Social media posts multiplied, and local law enforcement held press conferences urging anyone with information come forward. Barry posted messages online, appealing for Suzanne's safe return, yet investigators began to piece together troubling evidence. Deleted texts, inconsistent statements, and unusual activity at the home. Months passed, then years. During that time, investigators learned that Suzanne had privately confided in friends that she was unhappy in her marriage and considering divorce. Her friends described a woman caught between hope and fear, someone who had felt trapped yet unable to leave. Barry, however, maintained publicly that their marriage was strong, creating a stark contrast between public perception and private reality. In April 2024, after extensive examination, Suzanne's death was officially ruled a homicide, although the formal cause remained undetermined. Then, in September 2023, skeletal remains were discovered in a shallow grave near Saguache County, roughly 40 miles from Morphew's home. Forensic anthropologists noted unusual signs. The bones were unusually clean and bleached, insect activity was minimal, and the clothing remained surprisingly intact. These details suggested the body had decomposed elsewhere before being relocated to a remote site, where it was ultimately found. Toxicology reports added a chilling layer. Suzanne's remains contained traces of a sedative cocktail known as BM, a combination of drugs used for wildlife immobilization. Records indicated that only Barry, through his previous deer farming work, had legal access to these substances. Investigators found tranquilizer guns, darts, and other equipment in the Morphew home consistent with administering the sedative. The prosecution would later argue that Barry used his knowledge and access to incapacitate Suzanne, then move her body to the remote location to conceal the crime. Barry's legal journey was complex. He was first charged with first-degree murder in 2021, but that case collapsed due to procedural missteps, including evidence disclosure failures. Key witnesses were barred and charges were dismissed without prejudice, allowing prosecutors to refile in the future. The case's second phase began in June 2025 when a grand jury returned a first-degree murder indictment based on newly uncovered evidence. Barry was arrested in Arizona and extradited to Colorado to face charges, posting bail set at $3 million cash. Throughout the proceedings, Barry maintained his innocence. Defense attorneys argued that there was no conclusive evidence of physical trauma and suggested that the death could have been accidental or from natural causes. They highlighted the earlier dismissal, asserting that the prosecution's case relied heavily on speculation, and they questioned whether the forensic evidence definitively tied Barry to the crime. The prosecution, however, presented a case grounded in motive, opportunity, and means. Suzanne's intention to leave a marriage, coupled with Barry's access to the sedatives and knowledge of their effects, formed a compelling narrative of premeditation. The timeline of his movements, deletion of communications, and trash disposal in the hours surrounding Suzanne's disappearance pointed to calculated actions. The body's relocation suggested forethought and a desire to mislead authorities. Every detail, from cell phone ping data to the discovery of the sedative equipment, painted a portrait of a man with the means and motive to commit murder. For the daughters, Macy and Mallory, the case brought intense emotional strain. They were publicly supportive of their father, while facing the reality that they might be called as witnesses. Friends and community members followed every court development closely, some expressing belief in Barry's guilt, others holding out hope for his innocence. The small Colorado towns where the Morphews lived became focal points for media attention, with every hearing dissected online, fueling national discussion. As trial preparations advanced, unanswered questions lingered. How exactly did Suzanne die? Where was she sedated or incapacitated? Did Barry act alone? And what circumstances led him to relocate the body? The tension between public expectation and legal reality heightened, knowing that the jury would ultimately weigh intricate forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and the circumstantial web that surrounded the crime. The story encapsulates a tragic mix of domestic strife, meticulous criminal planning, and the slow, painstaking work of justice. From a routine morning ride that ended in disappearance to a discovery years later of a sedated and relocated body, the events traced a path through deception, investigation, and emotional turmoil. The trial, looming on the horizon, promised to reveal the final chapter in Suzanne Morphew's story and determine the fate of Barry Morphew, a man caught between community sympathy, forensic evidence, and the stark judgment of the law.